Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jerry, and today we got my Week 6 power rankings. Hopefully, you just watched my Week 5 review, but now we're going into Week 6. We'll get my power rankings out of the way, and then I will have my picks for you tomorrow. So let's get right into this, starting off with a team that's hung around the back, but found their way into the 32 spot, the New England Patriots. They were 31 last week, and you get a loss to the Dolphins, who we've kind of said this whole year that I've kept these back 5 or 6 teams are basically just for dysfunctional teams that are having some sort of problem. Now, the Patriots, a lot of upside, starting Drake May, hopefully some opportunities for him. Obviously, a lot in the preseason. Most of it was just, handing the ball off in short little passes. So hopefully they can give him some opportunity to stretch his legs. A lot of the rookie quarterbacks having success, and Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, and mainly Jaden Daniels having a phenomenal year so far. So next, let's give this a second here. So 1-4, 31st in points per game and yards per game. Jacoby Brissett obviously having a lot of issues on offense. Ramondre Stevenson supposedly getting a lower load, less of a load. Is not a good way to word that. Less carries, less touches, we'll say. Antonio Gibson, you expect to do a little bit more. Ramondre still gets more receptions and carries, so didn't really get phased out of the offense at all. But defense still okay for the Patriots, but just not really able to put it together. We don't need to waste any more time on them. But we will talk about the Cleveland Browns, who, tough to not put them even worse, especially with all the issues they're having. I just think their defense could be just slightly better. And honestly, Myles Garrett probably carrying a lot of the weight there. Just very dysfunctional on offense. And honestly, the defense spends so much time on the field that usually exhausted, usually not great. Patriots early on at least looked like they could stay in games and have an opportunity to win, whereas the Browns have had a lot of big losses, and not a great loss here. Obviously minus 42 in the point differential, but you'll start to see. Oh wait, I forget a number sign there for the points per game, but either way, you'll start to see that the teams that throughout, some of them their offensive rankings will be very good, and then their defensive might not be, or vice versa. And often those teams end up in the middle or the back, depending on how they're doing. But you can see here, not really ranked very well at all in any regard for the Browns. So they move back 2 spots for me to the 31 spot, looking a little bit more dysfunctional than the Jacksonville Jaguars, who get their first win over the Colts in a game where the offense finally able to put it all together. This was one of those teams where kind of dysfunctional both ways, where they weren't really great on offense or defense. Still awful on defense in this game. They have the lowest ranked DB room in the entire league right now, and they're going up against the Bears, who have Caleb Williams, who's already got 2 300-yard games on the season. You have Rome. You have DJ Moore, who's finally getting his connection with Caleb. Still have Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift out of the backfield. So it's going to be a very tough one for the Jaguars in London. But they move back to the 30th spot at 1-4. Another team where, barely get this win, and it's against the Colts, who haven't looked great either. They have Jonathan Taylor out. So this is a tough one. But the Jaguars sitting back at 30, and it's seemingly going to be tough for them to get out of there, as long as, the defense is going to have to put it together. Obviously, Trevon Walker has a good game in this one, but they're at 30 for me at 1-4. Definitely could move up, but I don't see them moving into the top area anytime soon. And you have to decide, what are you going to do with Trevor Lawrence? Do they think he's his franchise quarterback? We shall see. Next, we have 29, Las Vegas Raiders, another team just kind of dysfunctional on both sides of the ball. Everybody was kind of thinking Zamir White would be the guy, and Amir Abdullah and Alexander Madison end up being the 2 guys over him. And then Aiden O'Connell is now going to be the starter. Gardner Minshew gets benched, and their offense hadn't been great. I will continue to say that Gardner Minshew deserves a chance in the NFL. And with all the rumors with Devontae Adams and all the thoughts of, because with the offensive coordinator, not the coordinator, the what's going on with the offense, with Devontae and the trading, and Antonio Pierce being an interim head coach. It's just a tough situation. So Vegas Raiders are at 29 for me, and it seems like they could just keep moving back, especially if some of these teams at the bottom, like Patriots, if they end up doing better with Drake May, or if you see the Browns start to put it together for one, or even the Jaguars, if they play a good one in London, you probably see the Raiders keep falling back. Not really sure what they're going to have to do, but Aiden O'Connell didn't really look great when he came in this game anyway. So Raiders are at 29 behind the Titans, who on a bye week, they don't move. I try not to move teams when they're on a bye week. You'll see it happens a little bit. And it really just depends on if I think a team did significantly better to move past them, or another team did significantly worse to move behind them. But next we have the Carolina Panthers moving back only 2 spots. I just didn't think they were worthy of going behind the Titans, because I still think there's some promise, and I think the team looks better with Andy Dalton. I think, they got behind early and then weren't able to really utilize that run game like they probably would have wanted. And the Bears just kind of took over and took them down. So they do only move back 2 spots, but still a bottom 5 team. You could definitely make an argument with how dysfunctional they looked in this game, not really being able to do much of anything on offense or defense, potentially wanting to have them in that 30, 31, 32 range. How could the Panthers possibly be better than the Jaguars, who just finally got a win? But I think the Panthers, in their win, and since Andy Dalton has come in, I think especially Chuba Hubbard has looked a lot better, but specifically the offense in general just didn't look good in this game. So I'm not going to overreact too much, but Panthers do seem to me like a bottom 8-ish team. I don't think they'll really make it up much higher than that this year, but anything can happen. But they're at 1-4. Again, you can see another team just kind of dysfunctional all around, 29th, 25th, 32nd, 28th. It's just not really much promise on either side of the ball. Minus 82 in point differential, worst in the league. So they move 2 spots back to 27. And Dolphins move up again just to win against the Patriots, who are the worst team. I just put 4. They move up 4 because they are the lowest, 2 and 3 team that I have on here, and they get a win. I don't know. It's really tough to say that they're really better. I think Tyler Huntley over time might be able to start putting it together. But I think the only upside for their offense right now has just been their very diverse and lengthy running back room that just can all seem to do it. I think they need to get the ball into Tyreek Hill's hands more and Jalen Waddle. They're going to have problems until further notice unless they do that. So they do move up for me, but it was more just because they just looked a little more put together. And again, this is another team where I think you could easily make an argument that they're back behind, the team we just talked about in the Panthers or even the Titans. But I've got them at 26 for now. They move up 4 spots. Right behind the Los Angeles Rams, which is a really tough one for me. I'm very hesitant to move them back super far, mainly because they're so injured, like with the offensive line and the receiver injuries. I talk about it every week, but like what Matt Stafford is doing with the players that are out there, you get a Kyren Williams fumble in this game too. What Stafford's doing, I think, is actually pretty impressive. And the defense is pretty young, specifically the defensive line. You get Braden Fisk and Jared Verse starting on there, and honestly, probably 2 of the best players on the defense. Aside from a couple of the veterans on there. But the Rams, it's just, I hate to judge, because like I still feel like obviously the defense, they're just going to have to grow being a younger team there. But on the offense, you're just missing so many pieces that I don't think it's fair. Like, I don't think they're ever going to be worthy to me of going into that like 30, 31, 32 spot, just because you still have Matt Stafford and Kyren Williams, and Puka and Cooper should be coming back soon. So they're 25 for me. Unfortunately, at 1-4, unfortunately for them, again, 2 spots back from 23 last week, but I still think they could be an okay team. But unfortunately with the injuries, it's just tough to even see that as a possibility. Next, we have the New York Jets, who one of the biggest movers back at 6 spots. They're 2-3. They get a really bad loss. It is to the Minnesota Vikings, and granted, it was only by 6 points. And what really separated it was Aaron Rodgers' interception, his pick 6 that he threw. He threw 3 picks. But this is another one where, oddly enough, they're showing all the numbers, and all the numbers very comparable to when Zach Wilson was running the offense last year. Robert Saleh gets fired, so even be more of a reason to move him back farther. Really, the only reason they're not farther back is because I still believe in Aaron Rodgers, and if there was truly a problem with Robert Saleh, I would think that there's some upside. It seems like he likes Ulbrich, Jeff Ulbrich, I think is how you say his name. So, he's coming as the interim. Maybe Hackett's going to get more power with Rodgers. Maybe there was some sort of problem going on there, but Rodgers has been the one turning the ball over, and honestly, the reason this team's been losing. I'd also like to add that the offensive line has been one of the worst in the league, and the receivers have had a lot of drops, and there's been a lot of on-target passes that Aaron Rodgers, the passes from Aaron Rodgers, they should have been caught, but just been problems with the team. So the Jets end up at 24 for me, moving back a big distance, but again, it's just the team looks like such a mess. It just seemed like they should have went back, and they've been one of the biggest movers every week because I've kind of been overreacting and underreacting, going, okay, we all thought the Jets were going to be a top team. Let's move them up. Then I move them back. They have a couple bad weeks, and you keep moving them back. And if you look at the teams that they have ahead, I think there's a fair reason for it. But yeah, the offense 25th and 27th, and the defense 5th and 2nd. And then their defensive mind in Robert Saleh gets fired. So we'll see what happens moving forward, but they move back 6 spots for me to 24, right behind the New York Giants, where you're going, Jerry, you're going to put the Giants ahead of the Jets? That's ridiculous. But I got to say, the defense has been good all year. They just consistently hold teams to around 20 points, and the offense just needs to do it. Now, Malik Neighbors has been one of the top receivers in the league. He's out. Doesn't matter. Let's throw it to fucking Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson. And then, Devin Singletary's out too. Doesn't matter. Tyrone Tracy's going to come in and do it. So very impressive to me. Move up 3 spots. Again, at this point, it was with this, how this week went, I'd say it was worthy of the Jets. Now you could, ahead of the Jets, but you could say, well, Jerry, the Vikings are undefeated and the Jets almost beat them. Yeah, I know that. I think it's just with how messed up everything was, and what's supposed to be your biggest upside in Aaron Rodgers was the reason you really lost the game. That's kind of why they moved back. And granted, the Jets would have moved way up if they win that one. So it's a tough scenario for the Jets, but we're talking about the Giants. Again, I think the defense has played well and the offense is finally starting to click. They move up 3 spots to 23, and they're starting to look like they might not be. I could have almost guaranteed they'd be like a bottom 10 team this year. But so far, they're moving their way up my list and have made it up to 23 at 2-3, right behind the Cincinnati Bengals, who do move up 2 spots in a loss. It was a very close game where the offense looked phenomenal against the Ravens, which Ravens haven't had a great defense this year. And the Bengals defense needs to get better, but we're getting into this tier I was talking about earlier, where you've got some teams where the offense is amazing, defense stinks, or vice versa. Offense has kind of stunk, defense has been amazing. And we'll talk about a couple more of those soon, but I do move the Bengals up just because they fought a good battle against a Ravens team that's looked really good, and I think the way they were able to stay in that game until the end and into overtime even was why they moved up for me. So in a loss, looking better, and I always assume that the Bengals will get better as the year goes on. They always start slow, so kind of factoring that in a little bit there, hopefully not too much, but at 1-4, they're one of the highest 1-4 teams at 22, moving up to right behind the Indianapolis Colts, who I have at 21. They move back 2 spots, getting a loss to who was previously the worst team in the league, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the only defeated team left. They kind of a shootout. I still have Anthony Richardson in there. Should have Joe Flacco in there maybe, but they're saying Anthony Richardson's going to come back and he's still the starter, although he has the worst passer rating in the NFL this year, and Joe Flacco has the second best. What are they going to do? I don't know. Their offense has looked a lot better under Joe Flacco, and their defense just kind of stinks. So they're going to have to figure out defense, and Joe Flacco is going to have to keep doing what they're doing. I think the Colts move in probably the bottom 5 if Anthony Richardson comes back in, just because of how poorly the defense has been playing, and the offense has really not been great. Other than when Anthony Richardson's in, it's really a lot better when they run the ball. But this past week you have Jonathan Taylor out, and then Joe Flacco kind of has to do it all himself, and comes close, but not able to beat the Jaguars. So you got to move back when you lose to one of the worst teams in the league. But I move them back only 2 spots to 21 at 2-3 behind the Chargers. I said teams don't move back on their bye. I'll just explain why they moved back for me. There was just a few teams that I think in recency bias, I think they looked better. And there was some teams that I moved back. Like I think the Chargers are still better than the Colts. I thought that was a fair thing to say. But then we'll move on to our next team here is the Denver Broncos. I think they've really shined and they've been very exciting and they've been a great team. So I think with recency bias and the Broncos defense continuing to play as well as they have, and Bo Nix kind of doing enough, obviously didn't look great last week, but Bo Nix kind of doing enough and getting things done on offense made them worthy of me to pass the Chargers. So I was okay with that, along with the Arizona Cardinals, who get a massive win over the 49ers. I thought it would only be right that they move them back. And I didn't really have any teams to flip-flop back. So it was typically, if I'm doing this, I'd like to flip a team. You know, if I'm flipping this many teams ahead of the Chargers, like to move some more behind them to do some flip-flops past them, but just wasn't able to do it with some of the talent that we've been seeing from certain teams in certain weeks. But the Cardinals, just kind of a sneaky team to me. They get their couple of wins are really good where they dominate the Rams and then, they beat the 49ers here. So they've lost to some bad teams too, but I think the offense has been working. I think they need to get the ball to Marvin Harrison more. James Conner's still been a weapon. But the Cardinals move up to 18, 3 spots for me, similar to the Denver Broncos. But we're moving up to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who move back 3 spots for me. They get a loss to the Cowboys. Still having, this is another thing we just talked about, points per game, yards per game on offense, not very good. They haven't really been, they have been efficient to where they're able to, drive the ball down the field, dink and dunk, run the ball. But in a shootout, it just doesn't seem like they're going to win the game, which is unfortunate because their defense has been so good this year. But if the defense doesn't play perfectly, it doesn't seem like the offense is going to be able to win the games with Justin Fields and, George Pickens kind of being the stars there. Obviously, you have Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, and the rest of the crew. But the Pittsburgh Steelers with 2 straight losses move back again to 17 for me. I was giving Justin Fields some shit the first 3 weeks in. Then the 4th week, I go, wow, Justin Fields did everything I wanted him to do. And then Justin Fields comes back to earth and throws for like 130 yards and had not a great completion percentage either. So, the Steelers are just going to need to do better on offense for me to move them into the top 16. And they'll move right behind Justin Fields' previous team, the Chicago Bears, who move up 4 spots for me. I know it's only a win over the Panthers, but what we had been looking for, we talked about these teams, offense really hadn't been able to put it together. Defense plays great. Well, now the offense is starting to play better. So like I said, that carries a lot of weight for me when you still have this great defensive play and then your offense starts to show these good moments. So last week against the Rams, granted, not a great defense. And then, this week against the Panthers, not a great defense, but the rookie quarterback's going to need to be able to take advantage of some of those to build confidence and practice routes with receivers, figuring everything out. So, I think, and then plus Caleb's previous week against the Colts, where he has a 300-yard game. Unfortunately, they end up losing, but just starting to get the offense rolling. And when the offense is looking better and the defense is still playing like a top, probably 3 to 5 defense in the league, they're going to move up in my power ranking. So they move up 4 spots from 20 to 16, finally reaching that top half. The Chicago Bears at 3-2. Next, we have the Dallas Cowboys, who I have them at 3 and they're 3-2. Obviously, they just beat the Steelers, so to me, worthy of moving past the Steelers. Obviously, that's why the Steelers, they moved back. I originally had the Bears ahead of the Cowboys, and it just didn't seem right. Just because I think the Cowboys' defense has definitely been underwhelming, but their offense has been a lot better. So at least than the Bears' offense. So. Still a lot of problems with Dak and, some of the offense turning the ball over. They're going to have to sort through that. And honestly, the defense is going to need to play better. But I move them up just a 1 spot in the win over the Steelers. Not like a huge win, still a lot of mistakes, and almost lost the game. So it wasn't super impressive. Just move a little bit for me up 1 spot to 15 at 3-2. And then the New Orleans Saints have just kept moving back. The only reason they're at 14 is their first 2 weeks really holding them up there. They were still at first in points per game last week, and then they moved back to only 4 here just because of how many points they scored in the first 2 weeks. But I don't know what they're going to do. Derek Carr's injured now, and Chris Olave hasn't been getting targets, so maybe Spencer Rattler's what this team needs. But also Alvin Kamara hasn't really done very well on the ground other than those first 2 weeks. So going to be important for them to try to turn it around and get things going. But the Saints, unfortunately, if they keep losing, they're going to keep moving back. And honestly, even in a win, if it's a close game, they might keep moving back, because I think 14 is a little high for this 2-3 team. It's honestly just their first 2 weeks, knowing that they could do that, kind of holding them up here. But again, it would be very easy for me to put the Saints lower so far at 2-3. You know, their first 2-week wins against the Panthers and granted the Cowboys, you know, 2 big wins there, but just not really against super impressive teams. Obviously, the Panthers not very impressive, and the Cowboys looked very impressive initially, but Cowboys haven't been super great this year. So I've got the Saints at 14, again, bound to move back seemingly. Right behind the Falcons, though, who get a big win over the Buccaneers in, you know, overtime there. In a super exciting game here, too. Obviously goes to overtime. Kirk Cousins shows that it doesn't need to be a Bijan Robinson show. He can feed the ball to Drake London. He can feed it to Darnell Mooney, and they can have a great game. Excuse me. And yeah, I think the defense could be a little better. I think the defense has been a little underwhelming, but if Kirk Cousins is throwing for 500 yards, that's going to be enough to do it. 13 puts him into the playoff picture. Right now, with how my rankings goes, I technically have 3, NFC South teams in there. So I don't think that's gonna live too much longer. But I think that the Falcons are a great football team, and they've showed that. And Kirk Cousins kind of learning the offense and becoming better and better. But they're up at 3-2 and in the 13th spot, moving up 2 spots for me. Right behind the Philadelphia Eagles, who another team on a bye week who move up again, just because I think there was some teams worthy of you know, kind of moving around, and it ended up, I thought other teams belong behind them. So we look at the Saints. I thought the Saints should be behind the Eagles, and then the only other one I guess we'll get to here in a second. We've got the Seattle Seahawks, who moved back, just couldn't move them back behind the Eagles. But they're at 3-2. They lose to the Giants. Definitely should have beat a team like the Giants. A lot of problems with the defensive line, the injuries there, and then the offensive line in this particular game didn't play very well. And if you watched my review video, I just basically talked about how they didn't run the ball, and it was very disappointing that they went away from what had been successful, and that results in a big loss for me, especially at 3-2. You know, having back-to-back losses, one of the few undefeated teams through 3 weeks. You know, you gotta keep getting wins. So they're at 3-2 for me at the 11th spot. Next, we have the 49ers, who move back a spot in a game that they really should have won. This is one of the highest ranked 2 and 3 teams that I have up here. And it's even tough for me to keep the 49ers in the top 10. You say, well, how do you have the Cardinals at 18 and the 49ers at 10 if they just beat them? It's not always like that. You look, points per game 10, yards per game 2, points per game 12, yards per game 10. That's all accurate. So they're still a good football team. They've just lost some of these really close games. And you know, they lost to a team like the Vikings and now the Cardinals. And so, yeah, it's a tough one for the 49ers. And again, I'm very tempted to keep moving them back, especially at 2 and 3, but I still think, well, they're the 49ers. They've dealt with some injuries, and Brock Purdy is still a, Mr. Irrelevant pick. So keeping that in mind, knowing that he's every once in a while, he's allowed to have a bad game. This was one of them. Turned the ball over too much. Jordan Mason obviously turned it over. He's a backup. So I'm not too worried about the 49ers here. I'm only moving them back to 10, although I think you could definitely argue they should move back more in a loss to the Cardinals. Next, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Only moved back 4 spots. Again, it was in that Thursday night game against the Falcons. Should have won that game, and you could make the argument, well, why shouldn't the Buccaneers be behind the Falcons? Well, I think the Buccaneers have played some really good games and beat some good teams, and I still think that between Baker Mayfield, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Cade Otton, Rashad White, Bucky Irving, they've all looked really good. Just dealing with some issues on defense and injured defensive back room. Really only Vita Vea in the interior defensive line there too, and honestly, Vita Vea has been injured too. So they're at 9. Again, this is another team I think is probably a little too high, and I think could be moving back. But for now, they're going to be at 9. They have had some dominant wins, so still up at 9, but they did move back 4 spots from the previous week, right behind the Green Bay Packers, who, yeah, they get a win against the Rams. I think it should have been a better win. And I thought Jordan Love has kind of declined a little bit so far this year. Obviously, he gets his first win, but Malik Willis, 2-0, Jordan Love 0-2, and honestly, Packers almost lose this game, especially with Love throwing that pick six, and it just I don't think he's really. Everyone was talking, oh, give him the house, with his contract or whatever, and I think he's been a little underwhelming. Josh Jacobs has looked good on the Packers. I think Jordan Love has looked good at being able to get the ball to all of his receivers and kind of show every week that there's not necessarily a wide receiver one. It could be Jaden Reed, who people kind of pick as that, but it could be Christian Watson. It could be Romeo Doubs, who is suspended this week. It could be Dontavion Wicks, who got the most targets in this game. It could be Tucker Kraft, who had the most yards in this game. It could be Luke Musgrave, who's supposed to be the tight end one. So they can kind of go anywhere. I think the defense could improve a little bit, but they're still up at 8, still very high on the team, because it just seems like they win games. But unfortunately, this is Jordan Love's first win. So they do move back, just too close for comfort for me against the Rams, and not worthy of moving up, and especially with how some other teams played, like the Washington Commanders. Washington Commanders have been an absolute wagon so far. Jaden Daniels looks unstoppable in that offense. And honestly, Dan Quinn's defense has played really well. And I think the only reason that the defense has is very mid as far as stat wise, I think it's because the offense has scored very quickly often, and they have scored a lot. And the defense really hasn't had to do as much, although the defense has still looked good. So Washington Commanders move up 5 spots into the 7th spot. And this is a team that looks like they could be number 1 for me this year. If nobody can stop them, and they keep their offenses playing like this is definitely one of the more complete teams in the NFL, which is a crazy thing to say because they have a whole new coaching staff. They have a bunch of new players on defense, a new quarterback on offense. So it's a crazy story this year, the Washington Commanders. But they move up 5 spots for me to the 7th spot, right behind the Buffalo Bills. Move back 2 spots in a really shitty loss to the Texans. Josh Allen has probably one of the worst games of his career, conveniently against Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs doesn't have a great game anyway in that revenge game, but I just think the Bills are still the Bills, and I'm assuming that this is just their little slump. So I think they might even have another bad week. They'll move back if they lose again, but I think it's going to be tough for me to move them out of the top 10, especially when you have Josh Allen that can make those plays. And when Josh Allen can go 9 for 30 for like 120 yards or whatever it was, and they can only lose by 3 to the Texans, it just seems like you have a chance to win when you have Josh Allen. You also have a great opportunity to lose, so they're going to have to all put it together to move back up. But this week they moved back 2 to the 6th spot, right behind the Ravens, who have a big mover, which you could say this is an overreaction. It's more just because kind of the same reason I moved the Commanders up is their offense has been so dominant. Their defense actually hasn't been good here in the Ravens, but their offense has been so dominant that it just doesn't seem like you can stop Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and Patrick Ricard in the backfield. And then when Lamar can also just throw for 350 yards, it's just it's going to be I just feel like they're a top team in this league, and it felt right for me to have them in the top 5, just with how they played so far this year. So they're at 3-2. They have a loss to the Raiders. I'm kind of phasing that out a little bit with this high top 5 ranking. But just how great that offense is, it seems like it's going to be tough for them to lose games. Although, again, they have lost to a team like the Raiders. So we'll see what happens moving forward. But they're number 5 right behind the Houston Texans, who to me have to move up past the Bills when you beat the Bills. I don't think the Ravens are better than them. And that's kind of why they end up at 4 here. I just thought it was worthy of the Texans being ahead of the Bills. I didn't think the Ravens could be ahead of the Texans, so that's why they end up at 5, but I thought the Ravens looked really good, and with how shitty Buffalo's offense was and with how great Baltimore's was, I just thought that, that was kind of a nice range for them. And then the Texans move up, which oddly enough, they have a negative point differential so far this year, but they're 4-1, and I have them in my top 5 here, in top 4. They're just a team that wins games. That's really all they do. They just had one big loss, and that definitely moved them back for me, but they move right back up to the 4 spot at 4-1. With CJ Stroud's been cooking. Unfortunately, Nico Collins is out, so we'll see how he can do without him. I think he'll do fine. I think he'll still be able to get the ball to Diggs, and then Tank Dell will assume a bigger role. But the Texans are right behind the Detroit Lions. Again, I don't like to move bye-week teams back too far, and I think the Lions have been a great football team so far this year, although they haven't really played any serious talent. It's just with Jared Goff's 18 for 18 game and Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery being such great running backs. Jameson Williams has looked phenomenal this year with that as that deep threat. Sam Laporta is still Sam Laporta. It hasn't really looked as much like Sam Laporta this year, but then you also have Amon-Ra St. Brown. So great on offense. I think they need some work on defense, especially in the DB department. Their defense is mainly Aiden Hutchinson and then just some good pieces around them. But I still like the Lions, and I left them at 3 again. Didn't feel like anybody was worthy of moving around. Another team that didn't move around is the Kansas City Chiefs. They get the win over the Saints. Finally, a 2-score win for them and a bit more of a serious win. So they don't move for me. They stay put. They're 5-0. Tough to move them out when they're 5-0. They're undefeated. And then the other undefeated team, the Minnesota Vikings. They beat the Jets. It was a close one. The offense looked horrendous. You didn't run the ball well. Aaron Jones gets injured. Sam Darnold didn't throw the ball well. So honestly, a lot of issues all around just weren't worthy of moving out to me. They still win. And I think all around as a team, they've looked like the best. I think the Patrick Mahomes week that he had was pretty good. He throws an interception. He threw an interception, no touchdowns. Did he have I think he had an interception, no touchdowns, but like 330 yards. So still not a great week. It was just a lot of running the ball for the Chiefs, and the Vikings just end up pulling out the win. So they stay at 1 for me for now, but definitely if they play like they did last week, they'll definitely be moving out of 1. And then how far back they move would be dependent on, how the other teams play. But that's going to be it. Let's look at all of them together, shall we? We got, again, teams that I think are probably too high right now. I think potentially the Ravens. I think it might have moved them up too much, especially being at 3-2, and they haven't really been very consistent. I think, I think you could probably flip the Ravens and the Commanders. I think the Texans could be too high as well. I wouldn't be opposed to moving up the Commanders, honestly, at this point to 3. Like if I push the Lions back, which I said I didn't want to do, and then I slid all those other teams back, Bills go back to 7, Ravens go back to 6, Texans go back to 5. I wouldn't even be upset about that. I think that would be fair. I think the Buccaneers and the Falcons are probably a little too high right now. The NFC South starting to look like the NFC South. Saints is another one just too high. Even the Panthers, really, that whole division. So, let me know what you think down below. Am I way too high on one team or way too low? And then that's going to be it for this video. So thank you for watching and have a great day.